Today we are starting the book of Ezekiel, and I am actually not going to be the one leading us through it. Instead, Sean's going to be the one leading us through it, which basically is just another way of saying that he's the one guiding the conversation, but I'm probably going to end up talking just as much because I can't control myself. But another thing that's going to be different is that we just finished the book of Daniel. We've been working our way through the Old Testament for like several years at this point, and we're kind of just going chronologically through it. And we just finished Daniel, and we did a much more in-depth study of Daniel, because it's only 12 chapters long. And so we basically spent more or less like 1 week on each chapter. And even then, you're still only raising the surface of it. But we did go like verse by verse, going through it and trying to understand it. There were some weeks where we spent several weeks on a certain chapter. We're not doing that with Ezekiel. Ezekiel is what, 48 chapters? And so if we went that pace through Ezekiel, we would be in it for over a year. And then we would still have to go through the rest of the Bible, and at that pace, we would not finish the Bible until we were probably in our 90s. And so we're kind of just picking and choosing how to go through this here, and if we do our job well, you'll be studying your Bible the rest of your life, and you can do a much more in-depth study of Ezekiel in the future. And so we are going to be reading every verse, but we're probably going to be doing much more big picture stuff, kind of like we did with Isaiah and Jeremiah whenever we went through that a few months ago. And then like, usually just so y'all know what I'm kind of trying to do, I'm trying to prioritize like the narrative stuff in the Bible. And so whenever we went through like 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, we did go slowly. Because if you understand the stories that the prophets are responding to, you can actually understand the prophets a lot smoother. And so I say all that, we're going to be covering several chapters today. Originally Sean said he was wanting to cover 11. I said maybe like we would just spend our entire time reading it. And so we're going to dial it back. But we are going to cover quite a bit. And so I'm going to do the introduction for us real quick. Then I'm going to hand it over to Sean. And then he's just going to lead us through. This is the same slide that y'all saw with Daniel. This is just a timeline that I wanted to make just to kind of remind you where we're at in the story. Right? So we are, like chronologically speaking, we are nearing the end of the Old Testament time period. This is after the people of Israel went into the land. It's after they conquered the land. It's after they had a kingdom. It's after that kingdom fell. It's after they were sent into exile to Babylon. And now, where Ezekiel is currently writing, as you can see, he's like the pink at the very top there. He is contemporary with both Jeremiah and Daniel. To where Ezekiel begins writing shortly before Jeremiah's ministry ends. But then by the time Ezekiel's done, Daniel still has a long ministry ahead of him. Right? And so Daniel has a much longer ministry than Ezekiel himself does. And it seems like Ezekiel was, remember how we talked about with Daniel, whenever we talk about the exile from Judah, it didn't all happen overnight. Instead, there were waves of this, right? And so Jerusalem famously fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC. But that was the third deportation into exile. There was an earlier deportation, somewhere around, I think it's like 596, 597, so about 10 years earlier. And then there was a first one even before that. And we talked about in the book of Daniel that most likely Daniel and his friends, they were exiled during that first deportation. That was whenever Nebuchadnezzar basically sent out all the royal, like the royalty and the nobility. And it seems like, we don't know for sure, but it seems like Ezekiel was amongst that group as well. But with Daniel, he was just a young teenager whenever he was sent into exile, and that's why he had this multiple decade-long ministry to where he basically lived in Babylon for the entirety of the exile, right? All 70 years. He was there when it started, he was there when it ended. Ezekiel, he's already going to be an adult whenever he goes into exile. And he's going to have a shorter ministry, and so his book begins a little bit before Jerusalem falls. And he is going to end his book a few years after Jerusalem falls, right? And so really that is what the book revolves around. But like Daniel, he is writing from exile, and he's even going to mention Daniel in his book, which is actually really cool. Do you remember what chapter it is that he first mentions Daniel?
Don't remember.
Okay. Well, he figures that out. I just think it's cool because I think there is a temptation amongst like critical scholars and skeptics to argue that the Bible wasn't put together until way later and that it's not recording like historical events and stuff like that. But what's cool is that whenever you actually look at the text itself, and you just examine it in the way you would examine any other book of the Bible, or just book of like history, there's so much evidence weighing in favor of its historicity. And it's also really cool, the fact that Ezekiel, writing in his time period, could reference a person like Daniel without going out of his way to explain, oh yeah, by the way, I'm talking about Daniel the prophet. He just references Daniel as if he was a well-known person to his original audience, which is really cool. Because it doesn't look like Ezekiel is trying to make up this Daniel figure or make it line up with the book of Daniel. He just mentions Daniel and he lumps him together with some other famous biblical figures. And that's kind of cool. And so that's where we're fitting chronologically. When it comes to the outline of the book more or less follows a chiastic structure. There are some people who try to read chiasms into the entire Bible and they go a little bit too far with it. But there is actually good evidence for this in the book of Ezekiel. If you don't remember what a chiasm is, it's what you see on the screen. Basically, it's you could also format this like if you were to flip it to make it vertical. It's basically like a mountain or a pyramid, right? To where the beginning and the ending of the book reflect one another, and they build to a central message at the very center of the book. So it's kind of different than how we typically write stories. We might write poems like this, but we typically, usually the way that we write stories nowadays over here in the West, we usually do Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the climax is in Act 3. But more or less, if you look, chapters 1 through 11 deal with the glory of God departing from the defiled temple in Jerusalem, whereas the final 9 chapters of the book deal with the glory of God returning to dwell in a new temple in a new Jerusalem, and everything is restored, right? And so there's a direct contrast. Chapters 12 through 23, those are detailing the judgment and the indictment that God brings against the people of Judah because of their failure to keep the old covenant law, right? So what we would call the Torah. Well, if you go to 34 through 39, those are God's promises to restore the people with this whole thing which we call the new covenant. And so that's going to be the passages where you hear God promising he's going to give his spirit to people. And that you're going to get the famous the vision of the dry bones, right? The valley of dry bones where they come to life. That's going to be in that section. And so it directly contrasts. Judah failed, and so they are going to be punished. But God is going to somehow fix things. He's going to resurrect Israel from the ashes. Chapter 24 directly contrasts with chapter 33, because in chapter 24, the siege of Jerusalem begins, and the prophet Ezekiel is told to be silent and to not mourn. When you go to chapter 33, Jerusalem finally falls, and with that, the prophet is told he can speak again. Chapters 25 through 28 and 29 through 32 both detail like oracles of judgment against Gentile nations, so just non-Jewish people. And you can almost lump that entire section together if it was not for 2 verses in the dead middle of that, where all of a sudden God's judgment against the Gentiles is broken up, and there's 2 verses where God promises that one day he will regather the people of Israel, and he will restore all things to make them, to make it all good. Right? And so that is more or less the structure of the book. If you're wanting to break it down a little bit more, this is how you can do it. The first 24 chapters, Ezekiel is writing prior to the siege in Jerusalem. The next chapters 25 to 32, that is written during the siege, and then chapters 33 through 48 are written after Jerusalem falls. But keep in mind, unlike Jeremiah, Ezekiel is not writing from Jerusalem. He is writing from Babylon, but he is writing about Jerusalem, if that makes sense. And so that is more or less basically how the structure of this book is. Other things that I should probably mention just as a way of introduction, the book of Ezekiel gets really weird. We're going to see some of that weird stuff in these chapters today, but it gets weird in the sense of there is some stuff in this book which is just absolutely X-rated. It is not for the faint of heart. It gets weird. It gets saucy. It gets kind of crazy. We're not going to get to those chapters today, but I do just want to give you all a heads up about it because there is a temptation that I have seen amongst some pastors and scholars where they kind of like embarrassed about this stuff. And so there are certain chapters, like chapter 16 or chapter 23, you will just not see many pastors preach sermons about those passages. And I think it's because they're uncomfortable, because they're like, oh, this sounds weird, and we can't believe God would say those things. And I would encourage us, as we go through this, to not take that approach. Right?
So is it going to be, I'm assuming it's going to be a little different to Daniel? You'd say a little more extreme?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Daniel's not extreme. Daniel's got weird stuff in it, but what I'm talking about is that Ezekiel is going to be saying like X-rated stuff where he's saying Israel, whenever Israel was young, she was like a young girl, but she chose to play the harlot and sleep with all these men, so I'm going to uncover her nakedness and reveal her diseases to people. And she decided to sleep with men who had members like horses. It's very explicit, and you're like, whoa! And it's kind of understandable why people would get uncomfortable, because I think that's the point, right?
Yeah.
The whole point is that you're not supposed to read Ezekiel and feel comfortable and cozy. And so people get uncomfortable with it because oftentimes in our modern churches, that's kind of how we treat God, right? We don't treat him like this savior and king of this universe who deserves to be obeyed. We treat him like, our therapist who we go to feel really good about ourselves. And so a lot of people, they just they get embarrassed of God's character, and they try to downplay it and water it down and be like, ooh, we don't want to talk about that passage. I would encourage us to read it and realize at this point in the story, God is mad, right? And so it's kind of like right now, I do not cuss regularly, but if I were to drop a cuss word, I can guarantee you that people who know me would all of a sudden start paying attention to what I'm saying, because they're like, oh, David is mad, right? That's kind of where God is at in Ezekiel, right? He has been sending prophets to his people for hundreds of years. They have not listened. Ezekiel himself is in Babylon. He knows where this story is heading, and he knows the people have not repented. They're not going to repent, and it's just going to get worse. And so throughout the book, God is using very explicit language and imagery when speaking through Ezekiel. And I think we should embrace that, right? Our job when reading Scripture is not to cause God to conform to us. It is to understand who God is and conform to his image. That does not mean that you should go around all the time making crude, crass comments. But it does mean that there's a time and place for it, right? And those time and place, we have to be careful in discerning when those times are. But that's where we're at in Ezekiel, right? So just keep that in mind. I'm going to hand this clicker to Sean, and he can tell us whatever other introduction stuff that he wants. And in the meantime, I'm going to bring out the dog.
Nice. Alrighty. Well, honestly, I don't want to really go through too much before we just hop in, and we can just do introduction as we go through the book. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit nervous about leading, but there's a lot of stuff that I want to go through, but I think we'll be fine. Does everyone have a Bible? I do not.
I do.
You don't?
Hey,
Okay.
please don't do my
I can grab him.
I said I do. Oh, yes. Okay.
Say honestly, we could probably just not look at the screen too much.
Yeah. Well, I'll scroll through it just for the sake of
Yeah,
since we put it online.
that'd be good.
Whoa,
I'll do
you
Yeah.
be.
14, 15.
Okay.
14,
And
okay.
it's actually God who's grouping those three together.
Yes, because he says even if Daniel, Job, and Noah. Is that right?
Daniel,
Think
Job,
so.
and Noah,
Yeah.
something about their righteousness.
Yeah. All right.
A little further.
What are we flipping to, Sean?
We're starting in Ezekiel.
Oh, we're starting? Okay.
Yeah. Well, because I'm just going to read the very beginning couple verses, and then we'll go through that as our intro.
Oh, okay.
We already kind of went through very broad
No,
stuff.
I thought you wanted to go somewhere specific, so my apologies. Okay.
No, I just waiting for once Eric gets there, we can start.
I'm almost there.
You're good. You got limitations at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. So first, I'm just going to read through the first 3 verses, and that's all. And then we'll just talk about the introduction, and we'll go from there. I guess another thing I'll say is this chapter is going to be one of the weird chapters as far as the angel stuff and all the visions and stuff. But we're going to probably jump around a little bit. And I think once we go through the there's going to be a few things we're going to go through, and we'll realize that I don't think anything here should be that weird, as long as we're keeping sticking to scripture.
Yeah. The theology won't be. The imagery's weird, but we won't
Yeah.
arrive at any
Hey.
weird cult-like theology stuff.
You be. No.
Yeah. Okay. Without further ado,
I don't
let's
put
go
me
ahead
in
and
that
start.
CT, I'm sorry.
Now it happened in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was by the river Kebar among the exiles, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's exile, the word of Yahweh came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Kebar. And the hand of Yahweh came upon him. Just stop there. Okay, so when is this book taking place? In verse 1.
Okay, 30th year. So when we talk about the 30th year, I would assume the 30th year of Babylon.
So we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Actually, I should clarify. Verses 1 and 2, there's 2 different dates we see. I guess more specifically on verse 2, it says the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's exile.
So this would be the 5th year after the first deportation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so we'll keep that in mind. So we know that this is taking place. The book is starting in the 5th year of the exile. Go back to verse 1.
Oh, okay, in history. I read that wrong.
Yeah, you're good. So it says, now it happened in the 30th year. There's a few different things that have that people disagree with about what this is referring to. Before I talk, do y'all have any ideas? The 30th year?
So I have NIV and it says in my 30th year, so I'm referring to the 30th year of Ezekiel's life itself.
Right. Okay, so that's one. There's 3 different things I have in mind that this could refer to. So you're referring to the fact that this is referring to his age.
Yes.
And which makes sense. And do you know why that might be referring to that? Who is Ezekiel?
You beat.
Like what's his role? You go to verse 3.
Verse 3.
He's described as a priest?
So
what will be the significance of 30th year with a priest's age?
Usually that would be the year that they start their service.
So
for some reason I thought that's all goes back to the Levitical laws, right? For some reason I thought it was the 25th year, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. So one interpretation of this is they turn in the 30th year to in my 30th year because it is referring to his age. And the reason this is because this is kind of one of those verses that people don't know what to do with. So that's one. The second one is if you take the second verse where it says the 5th year of the exile and you go back 30 years, do you know of any event that might be referring to? There's only really one historically significant event.
Maybe like 600.
It's like
30 BC?
It's like 622 or 623.
I'm trying to think. Would that be like the reforms or like reforms under Josiah or Josiah?
Yeah, Josiah.
Yeah.
So another possible thing people interpret this as referring to when they discover the law.
Okay.
So this could be that. There is one other thing that it could be, which is if you go to chapter 40, verse 1, it says it starts during the 25th year of the exile, so 20 years later, and it starts on Rosh Hashanah. I didn't look too deeply into it, but basically what people have suggested is that Ezekiel revolves around a Jubilee cycle. And so this could be referring to the 30th year of that Jubilee cycle, whereas that might have been why Josiah started his reforms when he did, is because it was at the beginning of that Jubilee cycle. So then this is the 30th year of that Jubilee cycle, and then chapter 40 takes place 20 years later, so it's the start of that new Jubilee cycle.
Could you remind us what a Jubilee cycle is?
Yeah, so basically, from all that I really know is that basically a Jubilee is 50 years. And the way that the Jewish people kind of record their history is in these terms of these Jubilee, what's the word?
Cycles.
Yeah, like these increments, basically. And so another funny thing I didn't know is that people use this to actually to backdate the Exodus. And apparently, I don't know where they get the 16th from, but if this is the 16th Jubilee, it goes back to 1406 BC.
Okay.
Which actually lines up pretty well with traditional Exodus dating.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to spend too much time on this, but just to kind of set the picture. And because that is something that people don't really know what to do with.
Yeah.
But those are the 3 main interpretations of the 30th year.
Okay.
And okay, so what else? Where is Ezekiel?
Kebar River.
Kebar River.
Amongst the exiles. So he's in Babylon. Kebar River. Is that the river that goes through Babylon, like the city of Babylon?
It's a tributary of the Euphrates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like right next to Nippur and Babylon.
Okay.
So he's on the bank of a river, and he sees visions of God. So just keep this in mind. So where is Ezekiel? So Ezekiel's in Babylon. He's not in the land of Israel.
So it's very similar to what Daniel experienced.
At the end of his book, because he was on the river.
Yeah.
Another thing, just to quickly, before we go further. So, like you pointed out earlier, that he's contemporary with Jeremiah and Daniel. So here we see that he is in Babylon amongst the exiles of Judah, right? So he is going to be mainly administering to the people of Judah in Babylon. Whereas Daniel, do y'all remember who Daniel primarily interacted with?
Babylon.
Jewish people.
He was in Babylon, but who was throughout most of the book, who was he mostly interacting with?
He was mainly interacting with fellow like Babylonians,
Mhm.
and so that's why like 6 chapters of the book were written in Aramaic, which is the language of the Babylonians.
Yeah. And then where was Jeremiah at for most of his life?
He was in Jerusalem.
He was in Jerusalem.
He,
So,
he was there when the city fell.
yeah. So just keep that in mind. It's not super important, but you have 3 different contemporaries. One's in the land of Judah still, and then 2 are in Babylon, but one is more he's more ministering to the Gentiles, and one's ministering to the actual people of God.
Which actually kind of makes sense if you think about it, because Ezekiel is a priest, and the main job of a priest is to mediate between God and the Jewish people. Whereas Daniel was descended from like royalty, and so it makes sense that he would be acting like almost as like a foreign dignitary, like in Babylon, ministering to the like that's
Yeah.
like he's like even though he is, I mean, I guess we did talk about this. There is a possibility that he is descended from like not necessarily the Davidic line, but at least from the tribe of Judah, and so it's almost like Daniel is functioning as like a king in the midst of the Babylonians. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
That's like a thought, but
Yeah. Yeah, just keep that in mind. So he's not in Israel. He's in the land just outside. He's also a priest. And like I said, this is in the 5th year of the first deportation. So if he's in the first, if this is 5 years after the first deportation, this means that the temple hasn't been destroyed yet, right?
yes.
So this is like what, maybe like 15 years before?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like what, is there 20-ish years between?
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind as well. So this is we're in Babylon. He's on the bank of the river. He's a priest, and also keep in mind that Jerusalem has not been destroyed yet. So just keep all that in mind as we go forward. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this introduction before we hop in? Because I think that's
I think just the only other thing worth mentioning is the fact that he is a priest, and this is his 30. Like, if this is talking about him being 30 years old, there would be a significance to that, because this would be the year that, had he been in Jerusalem, he would begin functioning as a priest to the people. But instead, like in this, like this should be a day of a time of celebration for him. But instead, this is going to be when he begins to prophesy to the people, because they're in exile because of that. And so
that's actually a good point.
There's like a footnote in my study Bible, and it's talking about how him being in the 30th year and the heavens are opened and the hand of God coming down upon him is like he's a type of Christ.
yeah,
Because Christ was baptized on his 30th year, the heavens were opened, and then the Spirit fell down upon like a dove.
yeah,
And it's, it's foreshadowing Christ,
yeah.
right? And they're both beginning their ministry at that time too.
Yeah. Well, and there's significance to that, because I've seen people talk about how that does, like, it kind of foreshadows what Christ's role is. He is
Right.
functioning as a priest,
Priest,
as a prophet.
prophet.
David became king when he was 30. Like, and so like there's like this,
Yeah.
like Jesus, like the prefect, like the priest, prophet, king, like all those kind of pointing towards him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And since you mentioned it with the Spirit, another thing we'll also see throughout this chapter is there's like a constant mention of the Spirit. The Spirit entering him and him talking through the Spirit. That's probably something worth keeping in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and read through the end of this chapter, just because it's kind of all one thing, and then we'll talk about it. Then I looked, and behold, a storm wind was coming from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing forth continually, and a bright light all around it, and in its midst something like the gleam of glowing metal in the midst of the fire. And within it there were figures with the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings, and their legs were straight, and their feet were like a calf's hoof, and they sparkled like the gleam of burnished bronze. And under their wings on their 4 sides were hands of a man. As for the faces and the wings of the 4 of them, their wings touched one another. Their faces did not turn as they went, each went straight forward. And as for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man. All 4 had the face of a lion on the right, and the face of a bull on the left, and all 4 had the face of an eagle. And such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each had 2 touching one another, and 2 covering their bodies. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go, without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches going back and forth among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning was flashing from the fire. and the living creatures ran to and fro with the appearance of lightning. Then I looked at the living creatures, and behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, for each of the 4 of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like the gleam of beryl, and all 4 of them had the same likeness, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. Whenever they went in any of their 4 directions without turning as they went. And as for their rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all 4 of them were full of eyes all around. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction. Where the Spirit was about to go, and the wheels rose alongside of them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Wherever those went, these went. And whenever those stood still, these stood still. And whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Now over the heads of the living creatures, there was something with the likeness of an expanse, like the awesome gleam of crystal, spread out over their heads above. And underneath the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had 2 wings covering its body, on the one side and on the other. I also heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters as they went, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a sound from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something in the likeness of a throne, like sapphire stone in appearance. And upon the likeness of the throne, high up, was the likeness of one with the appearance of a man. Then I saw, from the appearance of his loins and upwards, something like the gleam of glowing metal, with the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward, I saw something with the appearance of fire. And there was a radiance all around him. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the radiance all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. And I saw this, and I fell on my face, and heard a sound of a voice speaking. Okay, that's enough of me talking. Okay, so it was a lot of reading, but basically what happens there?
He receives a vision of sorts of 4 living creatures who he describes in great detail. And I imagine if creatures like this had appeared to us, we'd be able to remember them exactly as well, because it's not like they're natural things that we would see in our everyday lives.
So
They're chimeras of sorts.
So I'm going to be honest here. We're going to be jumping around just a little bit, just because I think there's a lot going on in these verses as far as what it's drawing from. Because I don't really think there's too much here that's like, it's kind of like with Revelation. Revelation has a lot of what we think is weird stuff, but it's really calls back to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I think most of the stuff here, you can find it elsewhere in the Bible. And so I think that there's something beyond just weird creatures. So first, I just want to start off with the very, very first few verses here. He sees a storm cloud coming from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing forth, and a bright light all around it, and something in the midst, like the gleam of glowing metal in the midst of fire.
Well, maybe, again, I could be jumping the gun here, but I believe this might be in reference to, because isn't there, if my memory serves me right, isn't there aren't the Greeks going to come from the north, if I'm not mistaken?
No, Babylon's coming from the north.
So Babylon comes from the north.
And for right now, let's try not to keep this specifically about like trying to predict things.
Yeah.
Let's try to just understand like the imagery itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and because this, just so you know, when it comes to Ezekiel, the prophecies are not going to function exactly how they did with Daniel. Daniel's a weird book where Daniel is like just outright being like, let me tell you the next 400 years of history, piece by piece. That's very unique in the Bible. Not many prophets function that way. And so with Ezekiel, the main goal is like just, he's going to use a lot of imagery, and the goal is not to figure out, oh, what does this represent? Because it doesn't seem like it represents anything. He's seeing what he's seeing, and he's just describing it to us.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But it could be referencing previous things, like Sean's pointing out.
Yeah, it's definitely there will be a lot of references throughout here, and I don't want to spend like the entire time reading other stuff, but I do think it will provide insight. But like you said, it comes from the north, and so there's kind of two main words I want to look at here. So what's the two main imageries associated here in these first couple of verses? There's a storm wind, a great cloud. Do y'all might have any idea where else I've read about these things before?
The thing that I think of is at Mount Sinai,
Yes.
with whenever God arrives, and it says that there was a dark cloud and there was lightning and flashes of fire. And
Yeah.
That's what I'm drawn to too, is in Exodus, where Moses goes up to receive the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. I looked up a couple of these words earlier. So a storm wind, it's just like the word for like whirlwind and then the word ruach, like wind. The word for storm there, it doesn't really pop up until Jeremiah, but it pops up a lot in there. And it's usually translated as like the whirlwind of God. And it refers to his judgment, some kind of calamity he's bringing upon the land. And so you have this coming from the north. And then you have a great cloud with fire flashing forth. There's two words I want to focus on here, which is cloud and fire. Specifically with cloud and fire together. Is there anything that makes y'all think of?
The wilderness.
The wilderness and the pillar of fire by night, right?
Yeah, it's fire, pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. And also whenever Moses was in the tent, there was a pillar of cloud that would serve as God talking to him. And so there is kind of like this imagery here of both like the wilderness, there's Mount Sinai, and I do think it is interesting, just keep in mind that he is in Babylon already, but there is still this imagery of this whirlwind coming from the north, which he's not in Jerusalem, but this is in Babylon, so coming from the north in Babylon is kind of interesting there. Yeah, is there anything else that sticks out to y'all there?
Are we discussing the four living creatures yet?
We're about to get there.
Okay.
I just keep in mind, like I said, you have Ezekiel here. He's on the bank in Babylon, and he's seeing this great storm cloud coming, and there's this association with both God's judgment, but also God's provision.
Provision? Yeah. No, when I read that, I referred to just being like God's provision and presence from Exodus, right?
Well, I think in general that's what we're supposed to get.
Yeah.
It's the idea that from the get-go, this is the presence of God arriving.
Yeah.
Right? And what's interesting is that the rest of the chapter is the most detailed description of such a thing that we've seen in the entire Bible. We have similar stuff, like in Isaiah, he had a vision of the throne room of God. But that only lasted he described all of it in the span of 6 or 7 verses. 6, 7, whatever. But right here, we get a detailed description where, Ezekiel, he's on the river, he looks up, he sees this storm cloud rolling in, and it seems like everything that follows in the vision is what's taking place, I guess, would you say within the storm cloud?
It seems so.
Yeah, so and also, given what we read in Daniel, right? Daniel had that vision of, these empires rising and falling, and then it culminates in this one like the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven. And again, Daniel and Ezekiel are going to be contemporaries in that similar language, right? The idea is that whenever we think of clouds, we always think of there's puffy white cloud that are happy. Whenever the Bible typically talks about God riding the clouds, it's usually the imagery of a storm cloud, right? It's usually the imagery of darkness and judgment. And so I think it's interesting that the imagery of that is similar. Whereas Daniel describes the Messiah riding the clouds of heaven. Whereas Ezekiel opens up describing, we haven't gotten to God yet, but by the end of the chapter, it's God himself riding the clouds of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. So we can go ahead and move on then. So we get to these 4 creatures. Before I really just want to speculate about what they are, sorry.
You're good.
Just simply describe what is being described here. Not necessarily what they are specifically, but what is being described here.
So there's in the fire 4 living creatures, Their appearance is formed in human, and they have 4 different faces. 4 wings, legs were straight. I believe they had like a face of an eagle, lion, human. and
It's
there's-
almost like they're signaling the approach of something greater.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
Long
have,
story short, within the cloud itself, there are figures which are very clearly not human.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
and
that's
they have wings and
Multiple
yeah,
faces,
multiple faces.
and
Okay,
they're
and then
humanoid in nature.
and then we get a little further down, and how what are they described as doing?
They're just going straight forward.
Yeah, and kind of going to and fro on the earth as well. And we read a little further, and we start adding more to this. Now it says in verse 22, what is like over them?
Over the heads of living creatures there was something with the likeness of an expanse, with the awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads above. So basically, it's almost like this sea of like a crystalline appearance,
Yeah.
which this imagery should bring us back to Isaiah,
Mhm.
right? Because I believe in Isaiah, isn't the language very similar?
Probably.
Let me just go look at it real quick. It also calls back to Mount Sinai as well. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if the. Actually, I don't think Isaiah does that. I think it might be John in Revelation. Where like the idea of there's like this like sea of almost like rainbow or
Yeah.
crystal or something like
So
that.
I have something different in mind for this slightly, but and actually, so I did skip one section. There's also the wheels too.
Yes.
So it seems like there's 4 creatures and there's 4 wheels, and then above them there is some kind of like what to me sounds like a sea, basically, like a shining sea. And then what is described as being above that?
God himself, right? It's like, isn't it a throne? Above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something in the likeness of a throne, like sapphire stone in appearance. And upon the likeness of the throne, high up, was the likeness of one with the appearance of a man. So there's this man sitting on the throne, but as he is described, it becomes very clear he is not a normal man.
Yeah.
So you have one like a son of man riding the clouds of heaven,
Right.
which sounds familiar because we
Mhm.
saw it in Daniel.
Okay, so now that we've that's pretty much like the very broad description of what we're going for here. Now again, to kind of rewind a little bit, I think the first thing I want to call back to, if we're going to go back really early on, so it talks about these living creatures that are seemingly like heavenly beings of some sort. They're going to and fro the earth, but then also above them is this firmament. It's the same word as firmament there, and then above that seems to be God. Have we read anywhere else about this idea of like angelic beings kind of going to and fro from heaven to earth?
The time of the Lord.
Well, Genesis chapter 28 with the is it 28? Yes.
Yes, 28.
Yeah, Genesis 28 with the Jacob's vision of a stairway to heaven. Basically, Jacob is going off into exile, right? Jacob just stole his brother's blessing. He's going off into exile to go live with his uncle Laban. He lays down at night, puts his head on a rock. He has this dream/vision where he sees this stairway or a ladder to heaven. Some would consider it more like a pyramid or something like that.
Yeah.
And when he sees this, God is standing on top of the stairway, and there's the messengers or angels of God ascending and descending upon it.
Mhm. And so, early on back in Genesis, we had this imagery of something that was causing, there was this kind of connection, this lifeline between heaven and earth, where these messengers, human or angelic, were going in between. So I think that there is some sense of this calling back to that as well. As far as the general imagery here, is there anything else that how do I put this? Is there anything else that this reminds y'all of before I
What
Call it.
specifically? Like the
well, I guess really all of it, but so we have the pillars, we have these creatures, and we have this like sea, and then we have God above that.
This is from Daniel?
Um,
Well, no, not necessarily.
I could see it being like the tabernacle and temple. I don't know if that's what you're going for because
yeah,
in both the tabernacle and the temple, there's this imagery of it's a lot of garden-like imagery, but also there's like a lot of beastly, animalistic imagery. There's like a bronze sea
Bronze bowl.
that they have.
Yeah.
Like we call it a sea, but it's a bronze bowl that they fill with water.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you're going for.
Yeah, so the primary thing I have is the temple imagery. And I don't necessarily want to read it's almost the whole chapter, but if you go back to 1 Kings, or it's 1 Kings 7.
Something like that.
This is when I believe
Solomon just built the temple.
Solomon's building the temple, right? Yeah.
So we did this description of Hiram's work in the house of Yahweh. And I'm not going to read all of it, but first he fashions 2 pillars of bronze on the front of the temple. And there are all these decorations on them, and he calls them 2 different names. And then you read a little further, after the pillars are done, so there's 2 pillars in the temple. And then he makes this sea, right? There's this big sea, this big, basically a big basin that represents this sea. And then underneath it, there is 4 pairs of 3 bowls. So there's 3, 3, 3, and 3, and they're all facing out. They're these bowls. And then you read a little further, and there's these 10 stands that he puts on each side of the temple, and then each one has a wheel. And the wheels have these like pomegranates on them. And so there is this mention of pillars, the sea, these animals that are upholding the sea. There's also wheels alongside the temple. And it's not necessarily that it's all in one thing, but the temple as a whole, like these are all very crucial elements of the temple construction.
It's the same imagery.
Yeah. And so I think one thing you're supposed to think of with here is you have a guy who is in Babylon, and he sees the clouds open up, and there's this thing traveling towards him, and he looks at it and he goes, wait a minute, that looks like the temple.
Yeah.
The temple is coming towards me.
It's like a cosmic temple traveling in the storm clouds.
Yeah. And
Pretty
so,
trippy experience.
And so, yeah, and so I think, if you read through, there's also, it mentions in several different parts that there are these ox, these lions, there's cherub as well. They're all kind of integrated into this imagery here. And so I think the primary thing you're supposed to think of when you're reading in Ezekiel is very crucial temple imagery here. And as we read at the very end of the chapter, this was the glory.
Verse 28.
Yeah. So was the appearance of the radiance all around, and such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. And so, so just keep this in mind. You have, like, Ezekiel's in Babylon, where he knows the temple is off in Jerusalem.
Which is not north.
Which is not north.
Yeah.
But yet, from the north, he sees this cloud associated not only with God's judgment, but also he sees basically God's mobile temple. It's like a new tabernacle rolling in.
Check out my crib.
Yeah. What do y'all think about that? That's kind of a broad question, but like, what might be some implications or questions that arise from this?
Well, the first thing that he's going to be probably wondering is, why the heck am I having this experience? Because even before you've processed the fact that this is temple imagery, this is not your regular, like, Saturday night. Like, this is
For sure.
Something weird's going on. Yubi, stop.
It's okay if she licks me. I don't mind.
You want to have a barbecue chip?
In my mind later.
But so there's just that. But then I also guess the question would be, what is the greater, like? Well, the experience he's having seems unlike anything we've seen before.
Yeah.
And so it would suggest that there is some greater importance behind, like, there's a purpose behind this, right? God doesn't do stuff randomly, right? And so there's got to be a reason why God is appearing to him in a manner that somehow calls back to the temple, and also looks like a storm cloud coming from the north and traveling through Babylon. Like,
putting all this together, right? I'm going to go back to kind of the 30-year thing, right? Maybe this is supposed to be his 30th year, and he's supposed to be anointed as priest and serve his priestly duties. And however, maybe God's calling him to be a prophet when he's supposed to be called to be a priest if he was still in Jerusalem, in spite of all these events. I mean, that's just how I read it when I look at it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can get to an answer yet. I think we're not going to be able to know what the total meaning of it is until God actually starts speaking in chapter 2. But for right now, we're just trying to ask the questions that Ezekiel's probably having as he's having this experience, I guess.
Yeah. One more thing I want to reference to. There's a description of a very similar event going on that we had back in not the Torah, but in the Old Testament. And it comes from actually King David. It's at the very end of 2 Samuel. And
Sorry. No.
what did you do?
I killed the dog.
Killed the dog. Looks fine to me.
It's fine.
So I don't know if y'all remember this, but towards the end of 2 Samuel, we had this like kind of series of different things that wrapped up the book. And one of them was a song. It was a kind of the song of worship that he did, of thanks to God for saving him from the hand of King Saul. And I'm not going to read the whole thing; it's just like a little section of it. But he, like, this is in context of him. You know, remember King David? He had been on the run for like what, 10 years? It was a long while from King Saul, and finally God delivered him from King Saul, and he ended up eventually becoming king. And this is at the end of the book. This probably happened earlier on, but just kind of jumping in the middle of it, we read that in my distress I called upon Yahweh. I called to my God, and out of his temple he heard my voice, and my cry for help came into his ears. Then the earth shook and quaked. The foundations of heaven were trembling and were shaken because he was angry. Smoke went up out of his nostrils, and from fire his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens and came down with thick darkness under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He appeared upon the wings of the wind, and he made dark canopies around him, a mass of waters, thick clouds of the skies. From the brightness before him coals of fire were kindled. Yahweh thundered from heaven, and the Most High gave forth his voice, and he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning, and threw them into confusion. Does this kind of sound like what we just read?
Yeah. Well,
In a way, yes, but you're talking about the storm clouds, right? In a way, I feel like David's using imagery there to refer to how he threw Saul into confusion and led David away from Saul's hand. And here I feel like the lightning and the storm are just signifying God's presence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so in that psalm that he just quoted, David's whole thing is he's talking about how God delivered him, and the way that he's personifying God delivering him is in a very similar vein to what we see here. And that's kind of hinting at what I was saying earlier, that this imagery is weird to us, but it would, and you were kind of talking about this, it would not really be as weird to the original readers, right? For us, whenever we think of God, sometimes people just think of like this abstract concept. Some people, if they're thinking of something physical, they just think of like some, I don't know, bearded white guy or something like that. like I don't know, and we just like think of him, like, we almost picture like Zeus or something like that whenever we think of God.
Yeah.
Whereas, you don't lean against the microphone with your nasty self, that's weird. But whenever you look at, obviously Scripture portrays Yahweh, the God of Israel, as being entirely set apart from the pagan gods. But the imagery that it's using to describe God in many ways isn't that different than how you might see some of the pagans describing like Baal arriving on the scene. Like Baal is a storm god, right? And so he's typically depicted as riding the clouds. And I think that that's why oftentimes in Scripture, whenever you see God being described, he is described in a storm cloud of sorts, because this is something we take for granted nowadays, well, especially like over here, right? We live in Texas, right? One of my biggest frustrations is that I cannot get this grass to stop growing, and I have to mow it all the time, and there's these constant weeds, and they're like growing through, like, I like paved some stuff over there, and the weeds are growing through it, and it's driving me nuts, right? Because we get a lot of rain, right? I have to cancel a pool party for my youth kids tomorrow because there's going to be rain, right? That's one thing that we take for granted. If you live in the ancient Near East, like the people of Israel did, you can't take rain for granted, right? Whenever David talks in Psalm 23 about, the Lord being his shepherd who leads him beside smooth waters and who causes him to feed in green pastures, when we think of green pastures, we just think of a nicely mowed lawn, right? Like just something. If you go over to the land of Israel, you will see that their nicest green pastures are not what we have in mind. They're like, it's like little tufts of grass everywhere. Because they don't take water and rain for granted like we do. And so that's why you see so many like storm gods and stuff showing up in the pagan mythologies, because to them, rain is a gift from God. For us, we complain because we're like, oh man, this rain's gonna ruin my tan. Like that's what we think of.
Yeah,
because
I can't go fishing, there's rain.
Exactly, right? We think of rain as a nuisance. Because we take for granted the fact that, I mean, like, we're not an agrarian society where our livelihood and the lives of our family depends on crops coming from the ground. Like, we just go to the grocery store and buy our food. And we have bottled water. And we take this stuff for granted. And so in the ancient world, like, there's probably no image that more closely conveys, like, the arrival of God and God's provision than the idea of a storm cloud rolling in. And so you constantly see this imagery of storm clouds and stuff like that associated with the arrival of God. And then some of the other imagery itself, like even like the living creatures and stuff, to us it's very weird, but if you look at some of the other religions around them, it wasn't as weird. And so I just kind of say that to just kind of point out that for us, we're like, oh look, there's these connections in the Old Testament. We're like, well yeah. It would have been more understandable to them to describe things this way. Whereas whenever we talk about God, we're like, God is all good, all loving. He's nice. Like we just talk about these like abstract concepts, whereas ancient people, they tied them to like physical realities, right? God is a storm cloud coming from the north. And I don't know. I kind of like how they do it better than we do. But,
Yeah.
anywho.
Well, also like this. I mean, this is kind of like a complete side tangent, but I feel like a lot of the whole thing with like people describing God in like abstract concepts is a lot of people have a very dualistic way of thinking, where it's like the spiritual and the physical are completely separate.
Yeah.
And when it's like the way that ancient people thought of it, the way that like a lot of just like literally every single religion ever throughout all of history is like the spiritual was inherently tied to the physical.
Yeah.
So the only way that you could describe the spiritual was to use physical allegories.
Yeah. Well, that's something where, and this is probably a tangent where we probably need to get back to this, but on that point, modern Christianity, in a lot of ways, has been influenced by like Gnosticism. Which is one of the earliest heresies that the church was like condemning. But it's because Western philosophy has influenced us so much, and Western philosophy like championed abstract principles and separating the spiritual and the physical.
Yeah, Aristotelian.
Yeah, and so whenever we talk about stuff, even nowadays, whenever people think about, oh yeah, whenever we die, we go to heaven, and we just think of it as like we're like disembodied spirits floating around, whereas that's just not the way the Bible talks about it. It's like, no, heaven is going to come back down, and the world is going to be remade, and we're going to have physical bodies that are restored, and it's very physical. And we can't create this like divide between the spiritual and the physical. It's like, well, no, like those two things go together. But sometimes the physical stuff blinds us to some of the spiritual truths and stuff. But that is a side tangent, but it is relevant. Anyways,
For sure.
back to Ezekiel.
And say that's actually probably a pretty good segue into what I was going to mention next. But
Nice.
speaking of, is there any other details in this chapter that kind of stick out to y'all about just this whole vision in general? Anything that maybe y'all want to just bring up or touch on?
The only other thing I would mention is that the closest parallel we've seen to this in Scripture so far is that vision in Isaiah. But the difference is that in Isaiah, he was having a vision of the throne room of God. And so it was a very like static portrait, right? He is in the throne room, God is sitting on the throne, there's lightning all around, and God commissions him to be a prophet. Whereas in Ezekiel, it's a very similar image, but God is on the move. Right? And I feel like there is significance to that. Because, I mean, like in Isaiah, he has that vision in the year that King Uzziah died, right? And so there was this king, not a very morally good king, but he was a good, like, physically, like he was more or less like a very prosperous king. So his death, it would leave somebody thinking like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so it's like, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. And so the imagery is very static and like firm, to where God is like, he's like the great stabilizer, to where kings rise and fall, but God is still enthroned, and that's a good thing. Whereas back, like, Ezekiel's having this vision, they are in exile. They are on the move, and God is on the move as well. But ironically, it's almost like they're colliding, because they came from Jerusalem in the south, and they came northwards, and now God is coming from the north. To me, so it's kind of interesting how they're like kind of colliding into one another here. But,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one thing I did want to kind of mention, just because the text itself mentions it puts so many verses into this detail that it repeats it. But what do y'all think about this repetition of? It keeps mentioning how whenever like one thing would like wherever they went, any four directions, they would go. And there's this idea of like, wherever the cloud moved, the creatures move. Wherever the creatures move, the wheels move, and they don't turn at all as they go. It mentions it a lot. What do y'all think about that? Anything?
Creatures and the wheels.
Like, or does my question make sense?
Kind of. Aren't you referring to like the creatures in the cloud and the whole conglomerate being God's presence?
So, like for example, it talks about the wheels, and it says wherever they went in any of their four directions without turning as they went. And
maybe it's talking about God's presence and movement with intent.
Yeah, wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction. Where the Spirit was about to go. And the wheels rose alongside of them, for the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Wherever those went, these went. And wherever those stood still, these stood still. Wherever those rose from the earth, they rose from the earth.
I think this may be just referring to like God's presence and God being able to be everywhere at the same time. Again, I can try and look into it a little more, like maybe those are like God's advisors or Elohim or something, but I'm not going to try to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just the general energy is harmony. Right? Like that they're all, they're not combating one another.
They're moving as
Yeah.
one.
I think probably the main verse, or the main thing that kind of gives insight into this is it keeps also repeating, for the Spirit of the living creatures was also in the wheels. For the Spirit of the, where was it? It mentions how the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And so I think this is another thing that this is kind of, to me, foreshadowing what we're going to get to in the later half of the book, which is, it's going to talk a little more about like the new covenant and the Spirit and stuff. I think this kind of gives us a little bit insight into the idea of like the oneness of God. And so one thing that we've been kind of seeing throughout Scripture is, God is this unwavering, unchanging, He is God. He's holy, but he has he's one God with one Spirit. But I think that in this we kind of see that like everything described in this temple imagery is the idea that they all have the same will. Like where one goes, they all go. There's this idea of like oneness. There's four different creatures. There's wheels. There's a cloud. There's a man. There's a throne. There's a sea. But they're all moving together. And I think this is kind of foreshadowing where it's going to lead to, which is this idea of, a new covenant with the Spirit of God being in man. As well as we're about to read how the Spirit is going to enter into Ezekiel and God is going to speak through Ezekiel. The idea is what God says, Ezekiel will say. What God says, Ezekiel will do. Even the imagery of the wheels having eyes around them. It's the idea that, the wheels, they're moving around as everything goes. There's not any like turning of the wheels. They're stationary, but yet they move in the direction wherever they will. Does that make sense? Anything I wanted to add to that?
I guess just for me, it feels like a reflection of like the Trinity, because you mentioned it's like there's like, you said it was like harmony, right? Mm-hmm. And like God's oneness and unity. I guess to me it's like a lot of things in creation are kind of like a reflection of the Trinity, where it's like there's three in one, right? Mm-hmm. It's like people, it's like you can kind of, mind, body, soul. It's like that's all me, right? That's all the oneness of me, but there's still the different unique aspects, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like the wheels, it's like they're acting as one together. They're completely unified, right? But they're still separate individual, wheels. So I guess it's just, to me, it's like creation is a reflection of God himself in a way, where it's like there's multiple persons, but they're all unified as one to accomplish something, right?
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. And we've talked about this in our Bible study before, but do you remember when we talked about the construction of the temple, where we had God in heaven, where Solomon prayed to God in heaven, but then God entered the temple. And we kind of talked about, how can God be in the temple, but also God can be in heaven. One question I might have for you here, what might Ezekiel be thinking if he's in Babylon, and he sees what it presumes to be the temple, or something that represents the temple flying in, and clearly God's spirit is in this thing. What might like the question be?
What's going down in Jerusalem? 'Cause
Like,
God's presence is supposed to be in the temple of Jerusalem,
yeah,
and so
So he's thinking like, yeah, well, what's going on? What's about to happen? What's about to go
Yeah.
down? This isn't normal.
the temple's here, then what's happening in Jerusalem?
yeah,
So I think there's also foreshadowing.
the temple's not supposed to be in Babylon. Which I guess even to that point, and we gotta move on because it's already 8:15.
Oh,
But to that point, one thing we're going to see, spoiler alert for what's going to happen over the course of the next few chapters, is that God's glory is going to depart from the temple in Jerusalem.
yeah,
And it's going to actually go, like, the imagery is it goes with the people of Judah into Babylon. And I think the message behind all that is that while God does make certain covenantal promises regarding the physical land of Israel, his covenant is primarily tied to the people.
yeah,
Right? And so, it was never just about the physical temple in Jerusalem. It's about the temple that he wanted to make his people into. Right? And that's going to be where we arrive at near the end of Ezekiel again, whenever it talks about God putting his spirit in man. And then the New Testament picks up with the church being like, yeah, we are together the temple of God now, to where it's not just about a physical building, it's about us, And so,
yeah,
I think there is there's significance to that because the temple that he sees is a moving temple, right?
Yeah.
And it's coming to meet him in Babylon, which is relevant to where the story is going to head over the course of the book.
yeah. So it's kind of like we had before, like with the tabernacle, to where like when David wanted to build a temple for God, he basically said he was content to be fine without a temple because it wasn't about the physical location. He was like, I'm fine to dwell in a tent.
Yeah.
And that's in the same way, seeing this. And we read this in Jeremiah as well. God said, don't put your trust in the temple because the temple doesn't save you. I can destroy the temple just fine, and that's what he'll do. We probably need to move on a little bit. Any questions about chapter 1? We could spend.
I mean, there's a lot of questions, but
Yeah, we could spend 3 more hours of chapter 1. But,
Yeah.
Okay, we can go ahead and move on then. We can go to chapter 2. Go ahead and read ahead. So we just read how he had this vision, and he fell on his face and heard the sound of a voice speaking. So, going into chapter 2, God will speak. Then he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet, that I may speak with you. And as he spoke to me, the Spirit entered me and caused me to stand on my feet. And I heard him speaking to me. Then he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to a rebellious people who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. I am sending you to them who are stiff-faced and strong-hearted children, and you shall say to them, Thus says Lord Yahweh. As for them, whether they listen or whether they refuse, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. Now as for you, son of man, do not fear them, and do not fear their words, though thistles and briars are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Neither fear their words, nor be dismayed at their presence, for they are a rebellious house. But you shall speak my words to them, whether they listen or whether they refuse, for they are rebellious. Now as for you, son of man, listen to what I am speaking to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I am giving you. Then I looked, and behold, a hand was sent forth to me, and behold, a scroll was in it. Then he spread it out before me, and it was written on the front and back, and written on it were lamentations, sighing, and woe.
that sucks.
Oof.
Yeah. Okay, so what happens in this chapter? It's a pretty short chapter.
He gives a very unsettling message at the end.
He's like, behold, I am sending you to go send a message of mourning and grief to the Israelites.
God basically
And it
tells
is all
Ezekiel
in
what
this
his job
scroll.
is.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, hey you, I have a job for you. Don't mind the things you just saw. You're gonna go do this.
Yeah. Ezekiel is commissioned to be a
What does
prophet
it say?
to a bunch of just stiff-necked, rebellious people who aren't going to listen.
Yeah.
Which
Just
actually is a
yeah.
It's
like
a common thing.
it basically just needs to be attached to the job description of prophet at this point.
Yeah.
I always like to joke because people say, "Oh, I just want God to use me in a real powerful way." And I'm like, be careful with that. I mean, yeah, it's good to want to be used by God, but whenever you actually read the Bible, the people who get used by God the most usually are not recognized as that in their generation. It's more like later on, people are like, "Oh, that guy was right. Too bad we killed him." Like it's like, like with Isaiah, God's like, "Whom shall I send?" Isaiah's like, "Send me." And he's like, "So what's the job?" And God's like, "Oh, I'm going to send you to a bunch of people who are never going to listen to you. They're going to see you, but they're never going to behold. You know, they're not going to really see you. They're going to hear you, but they're not going to really hear you. And they're just going to, just persecute you." And he's like, "How long?" And he's like, "Till Jerusalem lies in ashes." And he's like, "How long is that?" "Oh, a few hundred years from now." Oh, so till I die? Yeah, till you die. Like, and then Jeremiah is the weeping prophet. Like, whenever you look at the prophets, like, it's like, yeah, they're used by God, but it's always to like a rebellious and stiff-necked people.
The requirement for like being a prophet at this point has to be like intense persecution and then death.
Yes, which I find very funny because nowadays, whenever people like, you have the in like the more like hyper charismatic communities in churches nowadays, like their whole thing is like they'll train people to be prophets and they'll say, but the rules are you can only say encouraging and comforting words, and I'm like, have you ever read the Bible? I was like, tell me that you don't know what prophecy is without telling me you don't know what prophecy is. Because there are comforting words in here, but usually it's only because all the words preceding that were so discouraging that God's like, I can't end on this bad note. Like, he's like, by the way, I'm going to fix things in the end. Like, even like the whole Jeremiah 29:11 thing, it's like, God's like, you're going to die in exile, but I'll bring your kids back home. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, to give you hope in the future. It's like,
it's like, y'all anyway.
Yeah, but long story short, Ezekiel is commissioned to be a prophet, and I would say, I don't know if this is where you want to head with it, but it sounds like his commissioning is very similar to Moses's. Because you even have the language, I am sending you to them who are a stiff-faced and strong-hearted children, and you shall you shall say to them, thus says the Lord Yahweh. Where Moses, his constant complaint whenever he's in the wilderness, is that these people are a stiff-necked people who never listen. And the reason Moses himself doesn't get to go into the Promised Land is because finally he gets so annoyed with these stiff-necked people that he just unleashes on them, and God's like, hey, bro, you shouldn't have done that. And so it seems like Ezekiel is being sent to the equivalent of the wilderness generation in Moses' time. So long story short, Moses, he spent 40 years dealing with these annoying people who never listened, and as a result, he died in the wilderness because of them. Well, Ezekiel's going to do the same thing. He is going to minister to a people outside the land of Israel. They're not going to listen to him. They're not going to pay heed to what he says, and he's going to die in the wilderness as well. And so there's like this.
There are a couple exceptions. This one being Jonah, where he just like, remember Jonah?
Well, no, yes, I remember Jonah. I'm just not getting the connection.
No. I'm saying like one of the, not in this time period, it's a little further back, but anyway, no.
Okay.
Kind of unrelated, but
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out that there are prophets where people have actually listened, though it's not as common.
Yeah, the story with Jonah, the issue with him is that he's the prophet who's not listening. The story of Jonah is just a comedy. It takes everything that you expect and flips it on its head. The pagans are the good guys. The prophet is the bad guy. The prophet doesn't listen. The pagans listen to the prophet, and so the Jonah is just a dark comedy, the whole from beginning to end, which a lot of people just miss. But anyways,
I'd say I definitely would say that they're like the main thing I have in mind here was the Moses connection, and I think it's even sadder because if you're following the Moses connection throughout, I would say that this whole book so far has been comparable to the burning bush incident, where he's not in Israel, he's in a wilderness, and he sees this appearance of God where he speaks to him, like this appearance of fire, similar to some of the imagery we just saw. In both cases, God is sending this person to go to Israel and speak to the leaders on behalf of, or to speak to the people on behalf of God, where they will be God's mouthpiece. But if you go back to Exodus 4, he says, go and gather the elders of Israel together to say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me. So I said, I will bring you out of the affliction of Egypt. But then he says, and they will listen to your voice. And you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and Yah will say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, so let us go. If you compare that to Ezekiel's situation, God says they're not going to listen to him. And so it's almost like in this case, the people of Israel are almost taking Pharaoh's place, where they're strong-hearted people. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, whereas the people of Israel already have hardened their hearts against him. So it's like even worse. In that sense, it's more close to the end of like Deuteronomy, to where the people have been rebelling against God.
But you also have to remember that, kind of unrelated, but it got to a point where Pharaoh was like hardening his own heart, and then it got to a point where God's just like, fine, you want to keep doing this, we can keep doing this, so he hardened Sarah's heart.
Well, that's going to happen with the people of Israel too, where right now we've seen that they have hardened their hearts against God, so he's punished them. But by the time you get to Jesus, basically, like, the idea is that just like with Pharaoh, he hardened his heart, and then God says, I will harden your heart. Well, once you get to Jesus, he basically says, I'm going to go preach to people, and I'm going to intentionally confuse them. Because they start off rejecting him, and so then he starts preaching in parables to confuse them more, so that they reject him even more. And then he declares himself Messiah, and what does he do? He intentionally antagonizes them. He starts flipping tables in the temple. He starts calling them out. And he is hardening their heart. So that by the end of Jesus' ministry, what does he do? He says, go and make disciples of the nations. Right? So the people rejected me, so I'm rejecting them. And so I'm going to send y'all to the Gentiles. And so, what are you looking at? He's like a German shepherd. He's like, I can't believe you can talk about the Jews that way.
Crazy.
But,
So many.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one making Jew jokes today. I swear.
It's fair. Okay, so aside from just that, what else does God tell him to do here? So first he says, go and speak to these people. Just tell them what I'm going to tell you. Actually, first I gotta ask the question, why? Why would God send him to go speak to people who aren't going to listen to him?
because it need,
Well, I was gonna say that it shows that like they had a chance. Like you had a chance to listen and you had a chance to turn away from your sin, but it's like God's way of proving like your hearts are so hard that you won't. And so like if there's judgment that comes, well, I gave you an opportunity to like show you grace and for you to turn back.
Yeah. This is something that people like. Again, it drives me nuts. The skeptics. They're always like, oh, the Old Testament God is such a jerk, and I'm like, you don't understand. We read these books back to back. These are over the course of generations, and he is being so patient. And the reason he sends the prophets is to call them to repentance. And so, like, the fact that he sends the prophets at all is a sign of his graciousness. Because you go back to Torah, technically, the first 5 books of the Bible, that is all they technically needed, right? He gives them 5 books. There's 613 commands. He says, I have set before you life and death. Choose life that you may live. And he says, if you obey me, it's going to go well with you. If you disobey me, it's going to go poorly with you. He could leave it there. But instead, whenever they disobey, he sends one prophet. Guys, you want to repent? They don't listen. He sends another prophet. He sends another prophet. And by the time you get to Ezekiel, he's mad. And he knows they're not going to listen. But the whole reason why God sends them is so that whenever he does actually punish them, you can't say, oh, God's a big old jerk. It's because he's like, I gave you 1,000,000 chances, right? I mean, it's like, what do you want him to do? If he doesn't punish them, he's just endorsing evil. And so that's why it always drives me nuts when people are like, man, the Old Testament God's a jerk. No, the people of Israel are jerks. And God is abundantly gracious, but eventually, because he's good, he's got to punish them. And so it's like, he's like, Ezekiel, just so you know, they're not going to listen to you. But I'm sending you anyways.
I mean, it literally gets to like the point with like the parable of the vineyard that Christ says, where it's like, I'm pretty sure it's like the whole implication of that parable is like, he's given so many chances and chances to Israel over and over and over again, and he gets to the point where he's like, okay, I've sent everybody I could, I'm just going to send my own son at this point. And then even that...
Surely they won't reject my son!
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like he literally, like, it's like the whole thing with like, what's it called? With, I'm trying to remember, with like, Sodom and Gomorrah, where it's like, oh, surely if there's like, don't destroy it if there's like this many
50, 40,
yeah.
35,
yeah,
30,
it's like,
25,
it's like
20,
God quite literally
20.
does that with Israel. He's like, okay, I'm going to send all the prophets, and then it's like we get to the last one. He's like, okay, I just have to send my own son at that point, and then even that doesn't work out.
Yeah. And so Is that the answer you were kind of
Yeah.
leaning us towards?
Okay.
And so the other question you were asking is, what else does he ask him to do? So he also tells him, do not fear them. I love the language. It says, now as for you, son of man, do not fear them, and do not fear their words, though thistles and briars are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Neither fear their words, nor be dismayed at their presence. It's interesting, because he's like, hey, don't be afraid of their words, despite the fact that you're also going to have to deal with all this major persecution. But don't be afraid of their words. If I was Ezekiel, I'd be like, God, it's not the words that I'm afraid of. It's like, it's like, no, that sounds pretty bad. The idea is he's going to have to face severe persecution, and God just says, don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Which I love. Do y'all remember this? I think I did this with y'all's classes. I showed y'all like it's like this stupid comedy sketch from like decades ago. But it's called like, you know what I'm talking about, right? The Stop It video?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember where it's like this woman goes into a therapy session and she like tells this guy like all of her fears, and he's like, okay, my advice to you, stop it.
Yeah.
And she's like, I can't stop it. And like, but the whole punchline of the video is just stop it. And that's kind of what God is saying to Ezekiel here. Hey Ezekiel, by the way, they're gonna hate you. They're not gonna listen to you. They're gonna call you all sorts of bad names. They're gonna say all sorts of bad stuff against you. You're basically gonna feel like you're constantly sitting on scorpions because of how bad it's gonna get for you.
Unrelated.
But don't be afraid.
Unrelated, but it kind of reminds me of Michael Jackson being like, stop it, get some help.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan, yeah.
Yeah. I will also say, like, as a small thing to add to that, so the words are briars, thorns, and scorpions. Briars and thorns, I think this is the first time, this is the only place they show up, but the word scorpion, every single time it appears in the Bible, it's associated with discipline. And most specifically in the wilderness. But,
Makes sense.
so I think that to add to what you're saying, it may not just be persecution from people, it might also be in light of God disciplining him.
Yeah.
They talk about like thistles a lot when talking about like, very prickly people.
But also, in regards to your point, a lot of the stuff that Ezekiel endures isn't going to be directly from the people. It's going to be from God himself. Because Ezekiel, I feel so bad for this guy. More than, Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet, but I don't even know what we can call Ezekiel because he's doing a lot more than weeping. Like, this man is going to be informed by God that his wife is going to die the next day, and he's instructed by God not to mourn. And the reason why is because of the message that sends to the people of Judah, because he's going they're going to be destroyed and they're not going to have time to mourn. And it's I don't know, for us it's easy to read this thousands of years later and be like, oh wow, that's a crazy story. But imagine being that, right? Like that. I don't know. Whenever we for me, I'm in ministry, right? And whenever we think of having a successful ministry, we think of oh, I'm going to preach a sermon and millions are going to come to Christ and it's going to be amazing. But there's also a version of a successful ministry where you have to go through stuff like this. And God says, hey, I want you to cook some bread over some poop and eat it. I want you to lay for a year on one side of your body and then flip over and lay for a month on the other side. It's I don't know, how we think of success when it comes to serving God is very different than how God does. And God's like, hey, you're going to be a prophet. I'm going to put scorpions under your butt. It's going to be awesome.
And it's a
Don't be afraid.
very Baptist mentality too. It's like, oh, how many souls have you saved? How many souls have you saved?
Well, I mean, in the I think it's Old Testament Joseph. It's he was described as rich and successful, not because of physical or achievements, but it just said he was in prison, he was poor, but the Spirit of God was with him.
Yeah.
He was very rich and successful, and that's how it says it word for word.
Yeah, it says God caused him to succeed in all that he did.
Yeah.
But he's in prison. Correct. Oh,
He is
okay.
succeeding in prison.
Yeah. But the idea is it's just faithfulness, right? Our definition of success is typically tied to the whole, American Western dream of making more money and having a nice, secure life, and that's just not. I mean, if that's your definition of success, then Jesus was the biggest failure in the world. Anyways.
One last thing before you go on to chapter 3, just because it's also repeated a lot, and it's going to get repeated further on in the book, even just in our section tonight. But the phrase, whether they listen or whether they refuse, that gets repeated a few times, to where it's just also probably worth adding on to this that Ezekiel is called to simply speak the words God puts in his mouth. He's not called to necessarily respond to the people according to the way they treat him. But as we're going to see later on, he's going to kind of put the burden of that on the people themselves to respond to Ezekiel properly. Ezekiel is simply called to give them, tell them what God has told him, and it's up to the people to respond properly. And this is kind of how it's always been, to where, and actually, I guess in this way, this is almost like as if Ezekiel is now playing the role of Israel to the exiles, because that's Israel's role in the world, is that Israel is supposed to, fulfill what God has them do, and the nations, it's on them to respond properly to Israel. But in this case, that's actually Ezekiel's role now, to where Ezekiel is going to his people. He just says what God has him say, and it's up to them to respond properly. We're going to see that, like I said, later on.
And that makes sense, because the whole reason they're being kicked out of the land is because they become as bad as the Canaanites. And God says, if I let you stay in the land, then I'm sinning against the Canaanites, because I kicked you out because their iniquity had come to its full, and now you're as bad as them. I can't let you live here, because he's like, y'all are my chosen people. Y'all are supposed to be held to a higher standard.
There are times when he says that they're even worse.
Yeah. And so it really is sad to me whenever you think of the whole story of the Bible. If the story of the Bible is God's commitment to dwelling with man again, the antithesis of that is man's refusal to dwell with God, and that's so sad. Because whenever you look at Israel's history, God chose them to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They're all of them are supposed to be a kingdom of priests, all of them. But then God speaks the 10 Commandments, and they're like, Moses, we don't want to go near to God. You go by yourself. And they reject him. And so all of a sudden, now you have a priesthood, right? And then they go into the land, and God's like, I'm going to be your king. And they're like, we would rather have our own king. And so it's like, okay, well, we'll appoint a king. And so there keep being these degrees of separation between God and man, to where it was supposed to be God, Israel, the nations. But Israel keeps rejecting him, so that by the end of the story, it is God, prophets, kings, priests, Israel, nations. There's this long list, and it was supposed to be one middleman, and then it becomes this long string. And that's why Jesus shows up, and he's like, forget this, I will be the prophet, the king, the priest, I will be God, I will be all of Israel, and he just puts all of it into one. And then that's why the book of Hebrews is there's one mediator between God and man, it's Jesus, because he does what Israel failed to do. And so that's kind of where the story ultimately heads. But
yeah, and then I don't know why they divide the chapter up this way. It's kind of annoying, but
I agree.
We ended with, I probably should have just read the next 2 verses, but we end with this scroll being presented to him, and just to read ahead, he basically just has him eat the scroll, and the scroll is supposed to be as sweet as honey. But just I don't want to spend too much time on it. But what's up with this?
Really good tasting paper.
I was about to say some nice papyrus.
Yes.
So,
Is it just God telling him to that he's going to be saying the words that he gives him?
I'm sure it's part of it. I mean, to be fair, I don't necessarily know if I even have a specific perfect answer I'm looking for, but just thinking in context of all this so far, he says that he's going to basically, this Ezekiel the priest is basically going to play the role of both Moses and Aaron, which, to be fair, Aaron only played a role really because Moses was trying to squirm out of doing it. But so he is God's mouthpiece. He is going to be as God to the people. And so he says, then I looked and he says, open your mouth and eat what I'm going to give you. And behold, there was a scroll that he showed him, and it says it was written on it, Lamentations, sighing, and woe. He says, Son of man, eat what you find, eat this scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel. So what exactly is this scroll? It says Lamentations, sighing, and woe.
This message is about what's to come for Israel.
Could be.
That would be speaking a lot of, that.
What was your question?
Just what is it?
A scroll.
What is this
The morning and
it's a scroll of Lamentation, sighing, and woe, but what does that mean? Who's why is he eating it?
Oh, why is he eating it? Oh, I have no idea. But I know John does it too in Revelation.
Yeah.
It was
What I was going to highlight is that like when you get to Revelation and stuff, it's the same imagery of he eats a scroll and it's bitter and sweet. And people always try to figure out exactly what that means as well. But here, there's a bitter message written on the scroll, but for some reason it's sweet to the taste.
Yeah.
And I don't have a clear answer there. That like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could try to work to an answer, but it might take me too long, and it's already 8:36.
Yeah, we can go ahead.
But I don't know if you have like a certain answer.
No, I didn't have a specific answer. I was looking for.
I have like, I guess somewhat of a thought on that. Is like in the Psalms it says that God's words are like sweet like honey.
Yeah.
And usually it's like virtue and righteousness in the Old Testament, in the Psalms especially, it's like it's described as like sweet honey, like positive imagery. So I'm assuming it's like, even though it's a scroll of lamentation and woes, it's sweet like honey, and like it has that taste because it's from God and it's inherently righteous and virtuous, and that's why it would have, it would be described as having that taste.
Yeah, I don't want to like overly speculate without like looking more into it, but that's kind of where I was leaning. Like the idea is the message is very bitter, but to Ezekiel it is sweet because like it's almost telling you more about Ezekiel's character, because obviously the content of the message is not sweet at all, but it's the fact that it comes from God, right? It's like these are the words of God, so it is sweet to His lips no matter what. And like we can say that, right? Because obviously the message here, like we're going to be reading through Ezekiel for a while, and it's not going to be a happy message. But we delight in it because we love God, and we want to know His Word, and we want to understand it better. I'd say we should probably do the same thing when we get to like the New Testament, and like there's certain things that are directly calling us out. We should delight in being called out. Whereas they're some people, they love reading the harsh stuff in the Old Testament because it's specifically calling out the people of Judah, not us. But it's like, well, no, like figure out like how does it call you out as well? Because the content can be bitter while also being sweet to you.
But yeah, you also have to be careful because a lot of people will look at that and be like, oh, this is only applicable to me and not anything else. And they forget to take it in the actual context.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's why we don't do that here. Context matters.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to skip just a couple verses past the scroll thing. Then he said to me, Son of man, go now, come to the house of Israel, and you shall speak with my words to them. For you are not being sent to a people of unintelligible lips, or a difficult tongue, but to the house of Israel, nor to many peoples of unintelligible lips, or a difficult tongue, whose words you cannot understand. For I have sent you to them who should listen to you. Yet the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, since they are not willing to listen to me. Surely the whole house of Israel is stubborn with a strong forehead and stiff heart. Behold, I have made your face as strong as their faces, and your forehead as strong as their foreheads. Like diamonds stronger than flint, I have made your forehead. Do not be afraid of them, or be dismayed before them, though they are a rebellious house. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, take into your heart all my words which I will speak to you, and listen with your ears. And go now, come to the exiles, to the sons of your people, and you shall speak to them, and say to them, whether they listen or whether they refuse. Thus says Lord Yahweh. Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard a great rumbling sound behind me. Blessed be the glory of Yahweh in His place. And I heard the sound of the wings of the living creatures touching one another, and the sound of the wheels beside them, even a great rumbling sound. So the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went embittered in the wrath of my spirit, and the hand of Yahweh was strong on me. Alrighty. We can probably go a little faster through here, because there's a lot of the kind of similar stuff being said, but long story short, what happens here?
He's basically God's pointing out the difficulty of like the task that He's giving to Ezekiel in dealing with. It's like he lays out two sort of things that Ezekiel should take note of. It's like, hey, I'm not sending you to like people who speak a completely foreign tongue. You're going to your people, and they speak the language that you speak. So they should understand you perfectly clear. But they're not going to because they're stubborn. So I'm going to make you as stubborn as they are. Because, otherwise you just like crack. And so he also says to him, he's like, yeah, this is not going to be easy by any means. Because of the fact that,
Yeah.
They're not going to listen to you, even though you're literally like, I'm just bringing you what God says.
Well, and I feel like a really bitter part about it is like, this is like the way mine says it's like, neither are you sent to many people speaking a foreign language or using strange tongues, nor to people of heavy speech, whose words you wouldn't understand. But then it says, surely had I sent you to them, they would have listened to you. Which is like, the implication is literally like, the Israelites speak your language. Had I sent you to like a completely foreign nation, like y'all don't even speak the same tongue, they would have listened to you.
Yeah.
But I'm sending you to them instead because they're going to reject you like they rejected me.
There's a reason they're called Israel, the ones who wrestle with God. Yeah, I mean, we even talked about with Jonah, right? You can literally have a rebellious prophet sent to the people of Nineveh, and they'll repent. Heck, even in that story, even their animals repented, which again is just funny.
The video on like Balaam, son of Baylor, where it's this donkey who like repents. And
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a bit of a different story.
Yeah, but no, it is interesting how I think there is an element of truth to this as well, because whenever you look at Jesus' ministry, the people who like I mean he highlights this, like the ones he came to save are the ones who knew they had a problem, right? Whereas the religious leaders of the time, they're the ones who rejected him because they thought they already had all the answers. And I think that that's kind of what he's getting at there, is that like, yeah, if you went to the Gentiles, they realized that they're messed up people. Like, if you called them out and said, hey, stop being wicked, they'd be like, yeah, he's got a fair point. Whereas the people of Judah, they had gotten, like, you know, I mean, even though they were living wickedly, they're like, oh, but we're the people of God, right? And like, they convinced themselves they were special. And God's like, you are special, and that's why I'm calling you to a higher standard. And this is where you get to the modern application for us as Christians. Because in our modern churches, we do the same thing. We're like, oh, well, I'm washed in the blood of Jesus, and that's why I'm comfy in my life. And like, you know, who are you to judge me? Because it's me and my relationship with Jesus. And it's like, well, no. Because you are special in his eyes, you're called to live to a higher standard, right? If you go to somebody who's not a Christian and you talk to them about Christians, they recognize, oh yeah, Christians, aren't they supposed to like love like Christ loves and live to a higher standard? They get it. Whereas if you talk to a Christian about it, they're like, I don't know. I think it's just all by grace, right? You know? By grace, through faith,
grace.
no works.
No works.
It's like, okay, correct. That's how you're saved. That's not how you live, though. you have to live for him, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think there is like this modern parallel where, if you, like, sometimes outsiders have a better understanding of God than insiders do, right? I know many atheists who understand what Christians are called to do better than Christians themselves. I'm not saying that they have a perfect understanding of it, and in many ways they are led astray, but I think that there are times where whenever we are part of the in-group, we are very quick to settle for like lethargy and just doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so, like, we can, I don't know, like, there's so many sermons I've heard where a pastor will be reading from like Paul's letters, and it'll be telling people to like stop sinning and stuff like that. And they'll be like, man, these are the things we see in the world. And I'm like, okay, Paul's not writing to the world. Paul's writing to churches. And he's saying that y'all need to stop this. And so it's like, yeah, you're not supposed to be pointing at the world being like, look how sinful they are. It's like, well, yeah, no, duh. That like, they don't claim to be following God. You shouldn't expect them to be sinning less. Of course they're going to be sinful. Mm-hmm. Like, it's written to us. Like, we're the ones who need to get onto ourselves, but we're so good at like just deflecting. And it's like, oh yeah, man, look at all the adultery going on out there. Yeah, look at all the lust going on in our churches. It's like, we need to allow it to call us out.
It's very easy to adopt a Pharisee mindset.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. One thing I like here, the imagery of, kind of like what you pointed out with the briars and thistles. In the same way, the way that it describes, the way that God says he's going to protect Ezekiel here, is he says he's going to basically just give him a stronger face. The imagery here is almost like they're headbutting.
Yeah.
And it's not that God's going to protect him from getting his face smashed in, it's that he's going to get his face basically smashed in less. It's like, basically they're going to butt heads and they're going to break first, not you. It's not that he's going to like just come in and save him. It's like, no, you just have a stronger skull than they do.
It's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you get hit and keep moving forward. It's like, it's like God, or what is it? There's a Bruce Lee quote about this. I don't think Bruce Lee was a Christian, but he says like, pray not for an easy life, but pray for the strength to endure a hard one. And that's exactly what God says to Ezekiel.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not going to make life easier for you. I'm just going to make you stronger so that you can go through some major crap. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. I just.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it reminds me of in Genesis when it talks about like the serpent and like the bruising of the heel. It's like both of them are getting hurt, but like one is significantly getting less hurt than the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's like the diamond in the flint here versus the head and the heel.
Yeah.
And I think Jeremiah has like similar imagery of like he describes making him into like a bronze fortress where like he makes it almost sound like the people of Israel are gonna like siege against him, whereas like he's gonna protect them against like the people. Yeah.
I was in the restroom. What verse did y'all read to?
I just read to the end of this page, so verse 14. And I was gonna probably go through it pretty fast. So,
Okay, yeah.
I mean, honestly, is there really any other thoughts y'all have here besides the last like couple verses? It's pretty much the same stuff we've been reading.
Have y'all talked about like verse 12 where it says, "Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard a great rumbling sound behind me. Blessed be the glory of Yahweh in His place."
No, not that. That's what we're gonna get to next.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So what about that?
I didn't even necessarily have a thought. I just thought it was a cool part. Like it's just like that's
Fair enough.
like just the language of it. It's like it's not him talking. There's somebody speaking behind him, pronouncing this, and it's blessed be the glory of Yahweh in His place. And just that interesting language. I was gonna see what y'all thought about it.
Yeah. I think maybe it's interesting to me what does his place mean?
Yeah. Well,
Like-
that's the specific part that's interesting language because
Like, how many times has this happened, right? Where, like, God physically picks somebody up and...
yeah, well, but right here when it says in His place, we typically think in His place would be Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But Ezekiel's not currently in Jerusalem. The vision he's currently having features God, and God's not in Jerusalem. And now this voice says, "Blessed be Yahweh in His place," and you're like, what do you mean by that? Right? It's like it's almost like a phrase that needs clarification because it's like, what is meant by "Blessed be Yahweh in His place"? Are you referring to Jerusalem? Are you referring to here? What's going on? You say that?
I said it's.
Oh, in its place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Y'all have any thoughts on that?
Your forgiveness, our sweet street. That song sucks.
You said you read to verse 14?
Yeah.
So I just have another thing that's just interesting notes. So the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went embittered in the wrath of my spirit, and the hand of Yahweh was strong on me.
Yeah, to me that's the weirdest verse.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like Ezekiel is having a great time with this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly, but it seems like...
He's just like yelling the entire time he's being lifted up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it just... Well, to me it seems like it's like he's frustrated by this calling, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Is this like... Is he frustrated? Like what is he embittered towards, I guess is my question.
Is it the people, or is he maybe just disappointed that it's come to this?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because to me, when I was reading this, I was trying to figure that out, and to me, that almost changes how you interpret the rest of the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, the rest of the chapter either reads as God kind of putting Ezekiel almost like he's almost disciplining him, or it's he's encouraging him. At least the way that I read it.
No, I more so feel like it's God getting Ezekiel in the correct mindset.
Because the only thing that made me think of was like with Moses, after he like speaks to him in the burning bush, he like there's that really weird story how like he leaves and it's like God's hands on him to like kill him.
Yeah.
And it's like a very weird, random, like very quick story.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think if there was any connection there, but that seems to be different because there it's like it kind of explains like it's the whole like his son not being circumcised. But
I don't think there's reason for us to believe why God would be punishing Ezekiel in this moment.
I don't think we're saying he's punishing him. No, I don't think we're saying we're punishing. We're just trying to figure out how is Ezekiel, like, why does he respond the way he does? Because the question becomes, like, if you go to verse 14, it says, I went embittered in the wrath of my spirit, and the hand of Yahweh was strong on me. So the question becomes, everything that follows, is this Yahweh encouraging him and saying, hey man, I get what you're going through, but this is your job? Or is he just like further clarifying things? I guess that would be the two options.
The way my text reads it is like it's slightly different. I guess it's specifically just the word embittered.
Mm-hmm.
It just says, the Spirit moved me and raised me up, and I went forth under the impulse of my own spirit, which I guess to me is like the way this is me kind of reading into it, but this is just like the way I see it, is like the impulse of his own spirit. It's like, to be a prophet, it's like you have to be humble and submitted completely to God. So it's like he was going under the impulse of his own will, his own spirit, what he wanted, and then God just kind of put his hand on it. It's like, hey, listen, man, I get it, calm down, let me tell you what to do.
The word here, it's the word mar, which is like, it's the same word like in the book of Ruth, like whenever Naomi changes her name to Mara, which means bitter, and it's the same word, even I think it's probably the same word from Exodus. Whenever they came to the bitter waters, and so it does mean bitter, and I think that sometimes like what translations are doing is I think they're trying to make sense of it. Like, this is one thing that actually drives me nuts about English translations sometimes, is that translators do more interpretation than they really should.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that's inevitable, because you can't literally just like wittingly translate from one language to another. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But there are times where you will see translators, they're intentionally they're reading their interpretation into it. And so the way that they translate the word bitter is they're like, oh, we don't like the idea of a prophet being bitter about what God's saying to him. Let's just, and they'll change what it says. Whereas I would prefer them to simply translate it literally and then leave, us to try to, figure it out together. And that's, a pet peeve I have so often throughout translations.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards the idea of, maybe he just didn't respond to this well immediately.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because there are plenty of there are some prophets who respond really well. Like Isaiah, he just goes along with it, as far as we know. Whereas I think Ezekiel could just be being like, this sounded terrible to me, because let's be honest, if God showed up to you right now and said, I've got a plan for you, you'd be like, plans to prosper me and give me a hope in a future? And he's like, plans to put scorpions under your butt and make you hated by everybody. You'd be like, I hate this. You would be frustrated, and so I could see that being a legit response on his part.
I think if we just go ahead and read through the rest of the chapter, I think that will probably give us more insight into what exactly this means. I was going to say something else. Yeah, I think we'll probably get. I think we'll just go ahead and read through the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. And then we can wrap up probably after that, because.
Yeah. Okay, so he went embedded in the wrath of the Spirit. Then I came to the exiles who lived beside the river Kebar at Tel Aviv, and I sat there 7 days where they were living. Mine says causing consternation, but he was amazed among them, astonished. Now it happened at the end of 7 days that the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, I have given you as a watchman to the house of Israel, so you will hear a word from my mouth, and you will warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you will surely die, and you do not warn him, or speak out to warn the wicked from his wicked way that he may live, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. Yet if you have warned the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered yourself. Again, when a righteous man turns away from his righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before him, he will die. Since you have not warned him, he will die in his sin, and his righteous deeds which he has done shall not be remembered. But his blood I will require at your hand. However, if you have warned the righteous man, that the righteous should not sin and he does not sin, he shall surely live, because he took warning, and you have delivered yourself. And the hand of Yahweh was on me there, and he said to me, Get up, go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So I got up and went out to the plain, and behold, the glory of Yahweh was standing there, like the glory which I saw by the river Kebar, and I fell on my face. The Spirit then entered me, and caused me to stand on my feet. And he spoke with me, and said to me, Go, shut yourself up in your house. Now as for you, son of man, they will put ropes on you, and bind you with them, so that you cannot go out among them. Moreover, I will make your tongue cling to the roof of your mouth, so that you will be mute, and cannot be a man who reproves them, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth. And you will say to them, Thus says Lord Yahweh, He who hears, let him hear, and he who refuses, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house.
Wow. Ezekiel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah, so I just reading that, it would lead me towards interpreting him as just being bitter and God's correcting him.
That's kind of how I read it.
Yeah, just because it seems like the main thing he's getting on to him about, well, it really is interesting. Like, it's been a long time since I've studied Ezekiel, but it really changes how you read this. Like, the imagery of Ezekiel as a watchman is going to show up several times throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like God's having to say, Ezekiel, you need to understand why I need you to do this. And this actually kind of addresses the question that you had raised earlier of like, if they're not going to listen, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And God kind of answers here, and he says, Ezekiel, your purpose is a watchman. And like, you know, a watchman, we don't really have these, I mean, I guess we have them nowadays, kind of. But in a walled city, going into battle, right, you have a watchman up on a wall, and their single job is to alert people if something is coming, right? And so, if nothing's coming, you don't hear from the watchman. If an army is seen in the distance, that watchman's number one duty is to sound the horn and let people know. And if the watchman does not do his job, and the city gets attacked, it is entirely his fault. However, if the watchman sounds his horn, and the people just don't listen, it's on them. And so God clarifies to Ezekiel, and it's like, you can see like Ezekiel's frustrated. He's like, I don't get why I need to do this. Why am I going to suffer? And why is my life going to be miserable? Because these people suck. And God says, Ezekiel, listen to me. You're a watchman. If you don't do this, then it's on you. Because I'm going to give you a message either way. And if you decide to keep your mouth shut, then you will know what's coming. And when it happens, it's on you because you didn't warn them. However, if you go out and warn them, you can wipe your hands, you're clean of it. Right? Now it's on them, and if they don't listen, it's their fault. And so this is God basically explaining what we said earlier. It is so that God, like, you can't blame God or the prophet whenever Israel falls and when Judah falls. Which, of course, modern skeptics, they like to ignore that, and they like to say, God's a big old jerk, I can't believe he would do that. It's like, no, he's not. He's giving them warnings, and he's setting Ezekiel as a watchman to warn them, and it's the people's fault that they don't listen.
Yeah. Yeah, I was saying earlier in verse 15, mine says my translation says causing consternation among them, which is kind of a weird phrase. What do y'all's translations say, if there's anything different?
Well, I think most of us have the same translation, because I think all of us have
LSB.
LSB. But
Because I feel like when I looked at the Hebrew, it made it look like it was more like he was astonished among them.
well, the word is the word that's usually translated as like desolate.
Which verse is
Desolate,
it?
yeah.
It's verse 15.
15. Well, I have NIV, so I'm going to be a little different here. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Aviv, and notice in my version, it's not Tel Aviv, it's Tel Aviv, where the B's are B's.
It is the same thing.
Yeah. Near the Kabar River, and there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, deeply distressed.
Yeah. So deeply distressed is what yours is.
Yep.
It's also just worth clarifying that the Tel Aviv here is not the same as the Tel Aviv in Israel. This is two totally different places. Tel Aviv in Israel is equivalent to Joppa in the Bible. Just to clarify, this is totally different. Whenever you see Tel in the land of Israel, that's referring to like an archaeological site, right? And so a Tel is just like it's a mound, which I think technically that's what the word
Like a hill.
comes from here. Yeah, it's a hill. But two different Tel Avivs. This one's in Babylon. But yeah, so yours said overwhelmed. Yours said distressed. What did yours say?
Mine doesn't even okay.
At the very end of verse 15.
Yeah, at the very end it just says, I sat there for 7 days holding conversation in their midst. I think part of it is because this is like an LXX Septuagint Old Testament.
That makes
so
sense.
because of that, it's like, there might be words that it's like, from what I understand, it's like they're pretty similar. It's like usually it's verses that are missing or verses that are added.
Yeah.
But because of that, it's like, there are things that like to a Hebrew person that would make sense, but they would have to change the analogy to fit like a Greek speaking Hebrew.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I got the LX. Yeah, it just says Hepta Chimeras
Let me see.
Arastrafamenas. It just says speaking in the midst.
Yeah.
In there. I was gonna read it, but this is Septuagint.
You also
And
have
I was like, wait a
Septuagint,
second. That, I can just look at it.
Yeah.
It
well,
calls
modern
back
technology.
to back to Psalm
You can read
137, I believe.
What?
You can read Koine Greek.
A little bit.
Yeah,
not
me too.
Not fluently. But the word there in Hebrew, it's just it's the word that you see a lot through Leviticus. That's for like desolation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and I will make the land desolate, so that your enemies will inhabit will themselves feel desolate. So it's like the idea of emptiness. And so I would lean towards it being like causing consternation seems kind of weird,
Yeah.
but it would be more like causing desolation. Like basically, you know when you're around a person who's in a really bad mood, and it just makes you feel like you're in a bad mood too. It seems like that's what's going on, right?
Yeah.
He goes back. He's bitter of spirit. He's like, I'm so mad right now. And then they're like, gosh, and Ezekiel's mad. Like, and like it's almost like they're also getting disturbed, and that's why some of the translations say overwhelmed or distressed. Like, it seems like he is wrestling through this. And so God shows up and says, Ezekiel, get your act together. You've got a job to do, and if you don't do it, we got a problem because you're going to be guilty whenever everything goes bad.
Yeah. It says that a whole week passes before anything happens.
Yeah. God's like, let's give him time, and then after a week, he's like, okay, bro. Yeah.
Alright. Yeah, so in verse 22 there, so what is, through the rest of the chapter, what happens there? So God came and spoke to Ezekiel and basically, he didn't put him in his place. I guess he kind of did put him in his place, quite literally. But he put him in his place, and he, as we said before, he basically says like, kind of like, it's basically what he already said before, which is, your job is to simply tell people what I say, and their response is up to them. But he adds on that if he doesn't, then the guilt is on him. Like, he requires the blood from him.
Yeah.
And then we move into the back half of the chapter, and what happens there?
So he tells him to get up, to go out to a plain. It doesn't tell us what the plain is, I don't believe.
Yeah.
And then basically God shows up to him again. And it says the glory of God was standing there like the glory which I saw by the river Kebar. And so I don't know if that means that he just sees like the throne and the man sitting on the throne again, or if it's like the whole vision again repeated.
Could be either one.
And then it says the Spirit entered him, caused him to stand on his feet, and he gives instructions to go shut yourself up in the house. And I was kind of having a tough time understanding the next part. It says they will put ropes on you and bind you. Is this like specifically talking about like is this setting up like one of like his almost like living parables that's going on here, or is he predicting how people are going to respond to him in the future? Like, is he saying that he should go into the house and people are going to tie him up right now?
That's kind of how I read it, but it could probably be either one because it doesn't really elaborate later on. It just, he says do that, and it doesn't even say that he does do it.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of confused because I can't tell if it's like, if that's just symbolic language or if it's literally like, go in the house, have people tie you up, and the next language is like, I'm going to make you really uncomfortable. Like, he's going to be dehydrated, he's not going to be able to speak, like he's going to be mute so that he cannot even reprove them for their rebellious house.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little confusing. I think... Yeah, I'm really not sure, but he does end by saying, but when I speak to you, I will open your mouth. And I do think that there is kind of a both. There is a possibility that it's both, to where it could be that he is, like, and this could possibly depend on how you interpret the earlier part of the chapter, if it's that he's not doing anything, or if it's that he's saying the wrong stuff. Because I guess it is possible, you could read it to where he maybe, because of his angerness, he was maybe saying the wrong stuff. So maybe he was just...
That makes sense.
Maybe he's saying, if you're going to be like that, I'm going to shut you up. And,
That could make sense.
And
yeah.
I want you to say what I'm going to tell you.
He spends a week just like making everybody absolutely miserable with his own words.
Yeah.
And so God shows up and says, hey, go in your house, sit down, shut up, and only speak whenever I tell you to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something like that.
It could be that.
And there could be the literal component of him saying, I'm literally going to make you mute to where you can only speak what I say. And that could be kind of like Balaam in the book of Numbers, where he can literally only speak whenever God tells him to speak.
Yeah, because it has been established by this point that it's pretty clear that God does want him, like, there is this component of, like, I will literally tell you what to say. Like, whether it's, whether it's a sense of, like, Balaam's where he has no choice, or whether it's, like, I'm going to tell you to say and you have the option of saying it. But either way, his function is to literally just to tell the people of Israel what God is going to tell them. And so, like I said, that depends on how you interpret the previous verses, but that seems like a strong possibility to me, is that God is making a point to him.
Yeah. And then just the final phrase, I don't know, I kind of find it comforting. First off, it's a phrase that Jesus is going to use a lot, right?
Yeah.
He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus loves that phrase. But the way that God delivers it to Ezekiel here, I find it very comforting from like a ministerial perspective, to where God just says, basically, it's not your job to force the people to listen. It is simply your job to deliver the message. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Right? And so it's like, that's like, I think you hear this talked about a lot, but like, our job is not to, like, you cannot control how people respond. You can simply control how you respond. And so your job is to simply be faithful. And how other people respond to your faithfulness, that's up to them.
Yeah.
Your job is to simply, like, if you're Ezekiel, God gives you words, you proclaim them. They're going to respond how they respond. He who has ears to hear, let him hear.
Yeah.
But he says they're a rebellious house, and so they're probably not going to hear. But that doesn't matter. Your job is to simply speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like the idea of, like, I don't know, a pastor going out and he preaches sermons every single week, even if his congregation gets smaller and smaller and there's only one person left. That's fine. Or just a regular, a day-to-day basis, living faithfully to God, obeying his commands, even if you lose your job, even if you lose your family, even if your life is going terribly, you just and the world is turning against you because of it. Just stay faithful. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We didn't get to the poop chapter.
No.
The poop bread chapter.
No.
It's all right. That'll be next week.
That's impressive. We actually managed to do 2 less chapters than I intended. Next week it's gonna be 1 chapter.
And originally you said through chapter 11.
You should have known better.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's too much of my voice, though.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's through the end of the chapter. Is there anything else that I want to talk about with this chapter? And like I said, there's a lot we could talk about. I don't even know what time it is right now.
It's like 9:10.
9:10.
Yeah.
Okay.
10:30.
Yeah. Right.
10:30. We're still going through chapter 3.
Yeah. Any questions about this? Like I said, I think that this last part, there's a couple different ways you can interpret it, but I think we kind of covered the main ones. Anything else you want to add?
Or I guess I would say, let's just make it our goal so that whenever God talks about us, he does not classify us as a rebellious house. Because that just sounds like the worst way to go down in history. They're a rebellious house, like, dang.
Yeah, and as we've already been saying, I think it's probably important to remember that just like the point that God's making to Ezekiel is you don't really... it's not quite the same. It's kind of like the proverb where it's like, don't answer a fool according to his, like...
Folly.
It's like there's answer a fool according to his folly, and there's don't answer a fool according to his folly. It's not quite the same principle, but I think here God's making the point to Ezekiel to where I think there is a temptation for all of us to where if we were in a position like this where we're talking to somebody and they don't respond the way that we want them to, I think it can be very frustrating. And I think that in some way the calling is the same to all of us, to where we're not called to be vindictive or to respond, necessarily eye for eye. We're called to just simply, talk to them with graciousness and love, and as God would have us talk to them.
Just be a junior high and high school Bible teacher for a little bit, and you'll know what it's like to talk to a group of people who aren't listening.
It smells so bad too.
Yeah. That's pretty much all I have for now. Like I said, there's probably a lot more we could talk about.
Yeah. Cool.
Hard.
All right. Well,
Anything else?
No food,
I
but
think
I'm
so.
upset.
thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the next 45 chapters. Sweet. One of y'all want to close out in prayer? Ideally, somebody who did not open us up in prayer. Go for it.
Lord, we thank you for allowing us to gather together and to go through your word. We thank you for guiding our minds and our hearts as we try to figure out what Ezekiel was trying to say through his book. God, we pray that you would allow us to think about this chapters and what we discussed throughout the rest of our week, and let us be a light for you, Lord, as we encounter different people. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.